What's up, everybody? It is Izzy. We are back here with another day of Q&A. There's been a lot of more questions lately, which has been a little bit difficult to keep up with, but that's a quality problem to have, and I'm glad to have so much participation. Anyway, on to the first question of the day. What are your favorite rear delt exercises? I only know rear delt flies and face pulls. I don't really use anything else. I use cable variations of both rear flies and face pulls. As long as standardized and slow, does Deadstop versus touch and go matter much for conventional deadlifts? I actually think that it does. And the reason why is because when you do a touch and go deadlift, it moves the strength curve from being hardest right off of the floor to wherever you are personally weakest. So it tends to make it a little bit more posterior chain dominant and reduces the requirements from your lower back and your quads. The other thing that touch and go versus conventional will do, in my experience, is people tend to control their eccentrics a little better with touch and go. Not everyone. Some people obviously just slam the weight into the floor. But with Deadstop, it's very, very tempting to just drop the bar for the last few inches of the range of motion, and most people end up doing that. Overall, I don't think it makes a huge difference, but you are doing a little bit more weight, sometimes significantly more weight, for the same range of motion, and you're going to be less likely to have your back round, because a lot of back rounding is you just opening up your knee angle and hip angle to make it easier to break the bar from the floor, because that's the hardest part of a deadlift, and touch and go removes that. So if you want your deadlifts to be a little bit less quad and low back and a little bit more posterior chain, I think touch and go is an okay choice, but just do whatever you prefer in the grand scheme.
Have you tried picking different parents?
When and what muscles to apply beyond failure training? How does it compare to just failure? I personally do not use lengthened partials unless a movement is heavily short biased. So if it's really, really hard at lockout, think like a dumbbell lateral raise. I will end up using lengthened partials because otherwise I just have to do so many sets and I don't feel like I get that much out of each set. Most rows are another good example of this. I wouldn't really say it's about muscles because it's about strength curve, which is what I've been talking about. But there are certain muscles that you really can't even fully lengthen. The side delts are the best example. And when you have a muscle like the side delts where you can't really train it at its fully lengthened state, you can beat the crap out of that muscle with a lot of volume, brutal intensity techniques. And that's where I sort of use these things. You got to figure out where are you getting a good stimulus to fatigue ratio. On something like chest work, which is already heavily lengthened bias and damages the chest, not a good fit. For calves, yeah, maybe. Tips: if I feel and grow more glutes than quads from squats and leg press, even with a low foot placement. In my opinion, the S tier list for quads is going to be hack squat and pendulum. Those are the two best movements. They're pretty much foolproof.
Yeah, bro, but black no cracked. So it's either that or steroids give you a long life. What do you think it is? Although I do have some longevity points in my favor. My grandma on my dad's side is about to turn 105 in March. Both my grandparents on my mom's side lived well into their 90s. And then my grandpa on my dad's side, well, he died at sea. Back when that was the thing that happened. You just went out on your merchant ship and just never came back. So, yeah.
What books do you recommend for hypertrophy training knowledge? I highly recommend anything by Dr. Mike Israetel and the RP crew in general. I think they have some of the best quality books that are, more than just like a 5-page training program with barely any explanation. You'll get almost you'll get a university level explanation of the underlying mechanisms of hypertrophy, which will help you to start building your own experience base, because in the long run, if you want hypertrophy training knowledge, you're gonna have to try a bunch of stuff and see what works for yourself, because not everybody's the same, and you have to go and try exercises and methods and modalities and see what gives you personally the best stimulus to fatigue ratio. So yeah, as far as books go, highly recommend Dr. Mike and Renaissance Periodization. The next question, which I already know it's coming up, so this gives me a little bit more time to answer it, is basically using your training style, which is such low volume where you're only doing, maybe one set per exercise and 2 or 3 sets per muscle group. Do you still get pumps? Do you still feel a burn in the muscle? Do you ever get DOMs? Yes to every single one of those. Every single one. It takes me 1 set to get a pump on most things. As usual, I apologize for the frenzied pace at which I talk in these videos. I just feel like I have to get the answer before the video runs out. This question is basically, Hypertrophy training is important for intermediate powerlifters, but how should they structure it? Should it be very distinct blocks of hypertrophy and comp-specific work, or should it be more of a concurrent approach where you do a little bit of both at the same time? In my opinion, the approach should be largely concurrent, and you should have a pendulum-type periodization where when you're far away from a contest, it's a more hypertrophy biased, maybe say 70% hypertrophy, 30% strength, and as you get closer and closer to a competition, that pendulum will swing until you're doing, 80-20 comp to hypertrophy work, leading the last week or two. Training for a strongman comp. Is it smart to keep going full Izzy on the bodybuilding accessories or start using RIR? For any sport that has a technical component, I do not recommend failure training. Failure training is going to cause a lot of central fatigue and fatigue in general, and it's going to make it so that you have to use a lower volume and lower training frequency. And when something has a technique component, lower volumes and lower training frequencies mean a lower rate of neurological adaptation, and it also is going to interfere with skill acquisition because you don't have as many chances to practice. So failure training, in my opinion, is not appropriate for sports like Olympic lifting and strongman and powerlifting, where you need to be good at specific events, and specific events that are, in some cases, highly technical. It's best left to bodybuilding, where technique is basically only relevant in the sense that it helps you build muscle.
Well, slow enough to spell average wrong twice. Just kidding, that's kind of mean. My model here is the same as it is in a surplus, which is you should be able to add 1% load per microcycle. During a surplus, you might also be able to add reps. But at the bare minimum, I would expect to see a 1% increase in load per microcycle. So if you train a movement once a week, then you do 100 pounds for 10 reps, you should be able to do at least 101 pounds for 10 reps the next time you do the movement.
Could lying ham curls be better than seated if I'm not recovering from the next leg day? The idea behind this question is that short biased movements are easier to recover from than long biased movements, but you have to not conflate the short position and the long position. So lying hamstring curls trade in the short position, and seated hamstring curls trade the lengthened position, but both machines tend to have a short bias strength curve. So you're not going to notice very many recovery differences between those two movements. You're going to need another way to lower fatigue if you're not recovering in time for your next leg day. Options could be reducing volume, you could increase your RIR, you could use a tempo, or just much stricter technique in general would be another option. Yes, generally speaking, it would. For those who are unfamiliar with what we're talking about here, when the bar touches your chest in a bench press variation, if your forearms are perpendicular to the ground, that is going to maximize range of motion about the shoulder joint. The reason being is that if you go significantly narrower or wider, your forearms will be at an angle, and this effectively reduces their length and shortens the range of motion. So this is really easy to see on a super wide grip bench, right? You can see how that forearm becomes diagonal, and it greatly reduces the range of motion. So in general, I'm pretty skeptical for hypertrophy purposes of any grip that is significantly wider than shoulder width or significantly narrower also, unless you're purposely trying to do a close grip, because it's simply going to reduce the range of motion too much. But something slightly wider than shoulder width that feels better for you is probably perfectly A-okay, and that will be true on incline as well as flat.
Yeah, it's called liposuction. How do you think people get BBLs? I mean, if you have more money than discipline, have at it. Cosmetic surgeries seem to be very popular these days.
I've seen many people say that in a row where the arms are close to the body, you shouldn't let the arms go behind the body. It would be more advantageous to let the elbows travel behind the body because that also stimulates the rear delts. This depends on what your goal is for the exercise. If you're trying to bias or isolate the lats as much as possible, you don't want the exercise potentially limited by your rear delts. Now, I don't think rows are a good way to isolate the lats. To me, rows are a compound movement, and you should use them as a compound movement. So yeah, bring the elbows behind the body and get some rear delt too. What is the cue that you use for the hip rise in your deadlift? It seems very effective. I don't even use cues when I lift anymore, to be honest with you. I'm almost more like a baseball player. I focus on just making the swing feel the right way, feel the same way every single time. As far as this particular trick, I'm basically just popping my hips up to get a stretch in my hamstrings and then dipping down violently, trying to recreate as much of a stretch reflex as is possible. Does it actually work? I don't know, but it makes it feel a little bit easier off the ground for me, and it always has.
Well, a lot longer than it'll take you to rub one out, but a lot faster than it will take you to find a good woman and keep her happy. First of all, I'm sorry to hear that, man. Back pain is a itch to deal with, and the biggest issue with back pain is that it's multifactorial, and there's potentially dozens and dozens and dozens of different causes and different types of back injuries. So it's almost impossible for me to speak generally about fixing what's wrong with your back because I don't know what's wrong with your back. And the best advice I could probably give is to try to find professionals who are sympathetic to lifters. Ideally, like a PT that's actually worked with competitive lifters in the past would be your best bet. And then that person can guide you through the process of potentially, referring out to the right people to get imaging done. But you're going to want to hand that over to professionals because otherwise it's just completely guesswork. Dead honest, I would quit and find a new hobby. That's the actual real answer. That sounds boring as fuck and I have no interest. But I know what you're really asking is like, what's the ultimate minimalist program? And I guess my clever answer would be strict muscle ups and deficit snatch grip deadlifts. I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't actually seen Mike's video on this subject, but I can guess what it is about. And I will say that as far as general population is concerned, keeping in mind that up to 70% of American adults are obese, clinically, by the clinical definition, it's unrealistic to expect that we're going to get these people to count all their calories and exercise for 5 hours, 10 hours a week, or whatever the case may be. You also have to keep in mind that certain people genetically have completely different levels of appetite than other people. And there are people who eat like 24/7, never exercise, and are at a perfectly healthy body weight because they just don't eat as much, because they don't get as hungry. And there's people that are on the other side of that equation who never get full, can eat 4,000, 5,000 calories in one sitting when it's pizza and hamburgers, and these people become obese. I think people get so caught up in idealism that sometimes they forget you sometimes just have to do what works. I worked with maybe 200 to 300 competitive powerlifters over the last 10 years. Do you know what percentage I would say were 95% plus compliant with their diet every single week? Less than 5%. So if competitive lifters who think about this all the time are dedicating 20 plus hours a week or 10 to 20 hours a week in the gym, are having a failure rate as far as like sticking to counting their macros and calories of over 95%. What makes you think that some 320-pound dude or woman with multiple kids and a family that also eats like shit is going to successfully count macros and exercise many hours a week? It's not going to happen. So if we have a drug that we can give them that decreases their appetite, and yeah, it might have side effects, but it's better than heart disease. And final point on this, sometimes people just need to have a little bit more compassion for other people because they assume that their fitness journey, the level of difficulties that they've experienced in their journey is the same level of difficulty that everyone experiences. And it just could not be further from the truth. Some people have extraordinarily slow metabolisms compared to others. I've seen people that maintain their body weight on 10 times their body weight in calories. You have some person who is 150 pounds and they can't eat more than 1,500 calories a day without gaining weight. That's like one restaurant meal. All their calories are gone. There's other people who can literally sit down and eat 7 boiled potatoes with nothing but salt and be starving afterwards. And there's some of you that couldn't get through the first one. Just have a little compassion. Not everybody's the same. No, it's not all about laziness. There is some of that, but it's not all about that. How would you program lower body specialization for a hypertrophy trainee? Well, it actually really depends on the specific trainee. For example, if you're talking about an IFBB pro candidate in like some men's open class who weighs, 270, 280, and he has weak quads, your programming is going to look really different than, say, a bikini girl or just somebody that wants to improve glutes as fast as possible and is literally a third of that size. So obviously it's always going to depend on the individual. But if you're looking for something that's pretty hardcore, lower body specialization, I would go a 5-day split, 3 lower, 1 push, 1 pull.
Why do you deadlift? Doesn't it have a bad SFR? First of all, I love deadlifting, so I don't really care. Just because something doesn't have the absolute best SFR, it doesn't mean it produces no results. People have this weird black and white way of thinking about things sometimes where something is either the best or it's worthless. I mean, deadlifts have obviously worked for my physique. Just look for yourself. None. There's not a single exercise in my program that I don't like and look forward to. I mean, if you truly hated exercise, don't do it. What exercise is worth hatred? I honestly have like PRs and goals and milestones that I'm trying to hit on every movement that I do. And I'm motivated for literally every single movement in my program. I would say the things that I dread the most are probably quad stuff in the 20 to 30 rep range, whether that's lunges, split squats, hack squats, back squats, anything in that like 15, 20 rep range is just so brutal. So I dread it a little bit, but I definitely don't hate it. It's still like a fun challenge. What is active ROM? Is that just an excuse to not train full ROM? No. So sometimes you can displace the bar or the implement that you're using a longer distance, but also defeat the purpose of the movement. A good example of this is, let's say you're trying to do a hamstring biased hinge and you round your back so that you can make your stiff leg or your RDL touch the ground. When you round your back, you're releasing tension off of the hamstrings to move the bar further, so it's a longer range of motion, but you've passed your active ROM, and now you're training outside of that exercise goal. Other examples could be, butt wink on a squat or rounding your back to get deeper on a squat. That might give you more hip flexion, but it's not giving you more knee flexion, and it doesn't help the goal of increasing quad size at all. It's just a bunch of fucking monkeys going, ooh, 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 ah, 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 ah. There's no sound. That's the whole point. There's no dialogue. Dialogue requires words. It requires talking. It's present moment awareness. That's what it is. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, you have to go to a level of awareness that's before thought. Take your hand right in front of your face. Stare at your palm or see if you can feel the surface of the skin. Go deeper into a specific finger. See if you can feel the blood pulsing within that finger. Pay closer attention, closer attention. Go inside. Pay attention to those sensations that you're blocking out 99.99% of the time with all of your wonderful, amazing, problem-solving thoughts, and dismiss them for the set so that you can take the information that your body's giving you in terms of sensation and apply it more quickly than you'd be able to if you process it with thoughts and then extrapolate the meaning. So it's wordless. That's the whole point. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks for participating in these Q&As. If you like them, like, comment, share. Helps me out a lot. Have a good one, everyone.